Hi, welcome to another episode of the Juan Keir Podcast. This time we're going to talk about this topic, the topic of this book, and I must admit that unfortunately didn't have time to finish it. I'm like halfway through it. I have to admit. This episode is a little early because I'm going to be traveling. Usually we would record this like Friday and like it would be up by Monday. It has to be up by Monday, but I'm going to travel on Thursday. I'm going to have a busy few days next days, and you were busy too with your thesis. But I think I read like the whole idea of like the book like presents the thesis very early on, and then has like a lot of examples, and I'm sure there's more to talk about with like the examples that they give and like the logic that they state throughout the book. And if there's something that I think was like completely amiss on the topic of this book that we don't cover in this episode, we'll cover in the next one. But so it'll be fine. But the main idea of this book is the narrow quarter, and it's do you want to explain it or like the idea? Like,
So the idea of narrow corridor as the main piece of the whole book and the theory is there exists a very fine line of, shall we say, the power balancing of government and society.
Mm-hmm.
Hence the narrow corridor. It's hard to stay in there. The idea is there's a fine line to play or balance between the power of the state and the power of society as a whole, as two, shall I say, diametrically opposed forces. Although we will explain this in more detail throughout the video, the main gist is the best governments or societies or countries have both a strong state and a strong civil society, I think would be
strong civil society capable of putting shackles on that state.
Yeah.
And like the way they explain it is like they basically call they make reference to like Hobbes' Leviathan. I mean, I used to say Leviathan, but Keir corrected me. It's Leviathan. And the whole idea that Hobbes said like in his books is like there's this concept of like war, which is like he writes it like Warre. And it's like is Hobbes like Thomas Hobbes? His name is Thomas, right? I forget what his name is.
Yeah, I think it's Thomas.
Okay, we think his name is Tom. I'm pretty sure his name is Thomas. But he said that there's this thing called war, and it's basically like the chaos of humanity. That when there's no one or no institution or no entity putting order, then there's disorder, and then there's like crime, murder, everything negative you could imagine. And Hobbes argues
returning library books on time. That's one of the
clearly the worst of them all. But what Hobbes argues is that you need a powerful Leviathan to put order, to scare the people into behaving correctly. Now, this book is basically like a consideration of that question, on whether or not that's true, and like to what point Hobbes they're correct. So like what the state of war that like Hobbes is describing is what in this book Acemoglu and Robinson call the absent Leviathan. Right? There's no Leviathan. There's no big and powerful institution enforcing the rules or property laws or any real kind of like stability. And so basically like no one does anything too productive because like if my friend Keir here was like starting a business and then he became like a guy that had a 10-hectare farm back when like people only had like small farms and he had like thousands of cattle, then like I think 10 hectares is like too small for maybe like thousands of hectares, right?
Don't get lost in the details.
Yeah, whatever. But like other people would be like, hey, there's nothing stopping me of just going and robbing your property, right? And when you have no laws and no property laws or no institution to like maintain this kind of system, then that shit can happen. And because that stuff can happen, then like you're not incentivized to actually try to create too much because it could be taken away from from you by people who are like jealous or just opportunists, right? That's what they call the absent Leviathan. Then like Hobbes says like this Leviathan, but there's also like the opposite extreme, which is what in this book it's called the despotic Leviathan. And the whole idea of this is like one person, not one person, but like an institution has like incredible fine-grained control. Not necessarily fine-grained, but incredible control to do whatever they would want in society without them, the institution itself, being liable to the public. You can think about this as like ancient kings or like maybe like the Kim Jong-un dynasty, the the dynasty. Like,
Well,
is it the Kim dynasty,
well,
right? Because they put their last name first. I forget. So it's like the Kim dynasty in dynasty. There's been two, but so far,
no, it's three.
There's been three.
Yeah, I think so.
Kim Il Sung.
Kim Jong Un and Kim Jong Il, I believe.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Because the first
There's
one
been
was
three.
like in the 1950s, I believe.
Okay, there's been three Kims. Maybe it is a dynasty already. You have
Well,
three.
fourth if you count Kardashian. Kim.
Of course. How can you forget about Kim Kardashian? You know, clearly part of the Kim dynasty. But that's so fucking stupid. But it's still going in. And basically, like the Despotic Leviathan, they can enforce rules, they can maintain property rights. But what happens is that because they're like very few people controlling a lot of power, they have so much discretion on which rules get enforced and which don't, or whose property rights are respected and whose aren't, right?
But it's also a thing of at that level of power, they can actually just decide to ignore all rules.
Yeah, exactly.
Like property rights.
But it's like
on one end of the scale, the absent Leviathan, or where the state just isn't able to project its influence, property rights are meaningless because there's nothing to enforce them. And on the very other end of the scale, in the despotic Leviathan or totalitarian control, the state is everything. So if they decide, no, like we don't want you anymore,
it's meaningless in the sense that you as a person not connected to the state have no power. But it's like if you have a relationship with the state and if the state likes you, if you're in the Kim's good graces, which always as Russian oligarchs will know, is not necessarily like a stable position. But if you're in the good graces, then your property and your work, whatever, will be respected, right? And so there's more growth in a despotic society than there is in an anarchical one. But the most growth and the most prosperity comes in what they call in this book the shackled Leviathan, right? And this is a Leviathan that's capable of enforcing laws, but it's completely shackled by the public and civil society. And so it's the job of the Leviathan to be hey, you committed this crime, that the society agrees that this crime is something that should be punished, and it's my role to punish you. And incredibly, what this leads to is generally is that both the public and the Leviathan get stronger together. Is anything in this that you would want to add?
I mean, it does. It's not exactly the same idea as say the shackled Leviathan, but Niccolo Machiavelli years ago when he was writing, I believe it was The Prince, he said, the best, I'm paraphrasing quite heavily here, the best rulers rule through both fear and love. But he says if you can't have both, just go by fear alone, because love won't get you.
Oh, I hadn't realized that's very good for the narrow corridor, right?
Yeah.
Because you can say that love is the absent Leviathan a little bit, right? Just this no one's doing too much harm or dominating anyone else. Then fear is dominating people. Then love and fear is doing both things together.
Yeah,
that's a great way to put it.
Machiavelli said, quite cynical point of view, but that's.
I think it's correct. I mean, it's
well, but it's.
I don't.
He's cynical for, I guess, justified reasons based on the chaos of Renaissance Italy at the time, and his warning was if people love you, sure, that's good to have people having love and respect for you, but if people love you and then they have no reason to fear you, and one person who doesn't like you can just shank you or raise an army. If everybody fears you totally, they'll be too intimidated to do anything.
Yeah, I think Machiavelli in this this Italian ebook is actually one I really want to learn a lot more about, because in the book they talk about the communes of the city of Siena and all that, and actually if you read Machiavelli's Meditations, so the prince is the context of the prince is that it's a letter to the Prince of Florence. The prince is like a king, right? Like an emperor, right? They decide what happens. This is very much a structure more akin to a despotic Leviathan than to a shackled one. But in Italy, you already had these republican states, right? You already had Siena, these communes. And Machiavelli in the Meditations, he talks about, which is a different book. I don't know if I guess like the prince is technically a letter that became a book, but it was a letter to the prince at that time.
From what I understood, the prince is like a fictional letter.
No. I think it's a real letter to an actual prince. I'm pretty sure. It's like something. One of the Medici guys, I think.
I just need to wait a week and see if there's a white text at the bottom of the video. If I'm right or wrong, I just need to wait.
Yeah.
But from what I think it is, I think it was a letter to a fictional prince.
I'm not 99% sure. We have like the book like here. I could pull this out. I really could.
We'll put this in post.
I'll cut it. We can just. I'll just cut. So yeah, like the prince starts as like Nicholas Machiavelli to the magnificent Lorenzo de Medici. So it is a letter to a real prince. It's like practical advice. It's basically like someone trying to be an advisor to someone and saying like, hey, this is how you rule a kingdom, or like the princedom in this case, right? But in Meditations, Machiavelli had already talked about like how he thought that Republican governments were even better. But it's like, well, that ain't our case. So because it's not our case, let's consider what else we can do, right? And so he was saying like, well, since we can't be shackled Leviathan, let's be a despotic one, right? Because it's better than like the absent one, right? But like he would still go to like the shackled Leviathan and say like, even in the Prince he says stuff like, hey, like don't treat your citizens like shit, like don't tax them too heavily and stuff like that. And so like it's a really interesting period in history, and it affected someone like Machiavelli, like this idea of like democracy a little bit, right? Because probably not women, right? Probably not like definitely not minorities, definitely not immigrants, but like some more and more men, right, got a chance to vote, like voice their opinions. And wait.
Oh, so yeah, we're back recording. Okay, good to know.
I'm
joking. On connecting back to kind of the idea of the narrow corridor, like we'll be saying these words a lot throughout the episode. So
take a shot every time. Okay.
But like that idea of the narrow corridor and different types of Leviathan, Machiavelli does point it out in throughout his work, because he does refer to the perils of having such a reliance on mercenaries as being the only state forces at the disposal of the city-states. Because this was a trend back in Renaissance Italy, all these city-states hiring out mercenaries to like conduct their military operations.
I mean, this feels very like libertarian.
Well, but Machiavelli points out how dangerous this is, because he said at one point, again paraphrasing because I haven't read this in a while, it's like, be careful on relying too much on mercenaries, as they are of a fickle nature. And there's no guarantee that somebody else can come and just pay them off to attack you.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure this happened many times. Because Machiavelli, he's a smart lad, he's a smart cookie, he saw this happen.
I'd agree.
So yeah, the idea of like, because in this case he's referring to the dangers of the absent Leviathan, one that is not able to enforce its own, whatever version of rules it may have, its version of rules.
Yeah. And so like, obviously like whether you prefer to live under an absent Leviathan or under a despotic one, it's what we talked about like the first podcast, it's like security versus liberty, right? And it's like, to like have a prosperous society you need both. And I guess like each person gets to choose which ones they prefer, and most people end up choosing security, right? That's what most people end up choosing. But obviously what this book shows, and like people like Machiavelli talk about, is that this like middle corridor, this narrow corridor in the middle, is where the most liberty and economic progress is actually found simultaneously. And I want to talk a little bit about what in the book they called the Red Queen effect. In Alice in Wonderland, when she's racing with the Red Queen, like there's this moment where like Alice is running and she's saying like, hey, like I keep running and I keep running, but like the trees are at the same like place. Like it's almost like I'm not running at all. And it's like, no, it's like you're running, but so are the trees. So is like the floor, so is like everything. And so it's like being on a treadmill, and it's like this whole idea that like what happens is that you have to have like everything in society or in the economy, or like however you want to define the collective, go like at the same distance at the same time. Because like the Leviathan will keep gaining strength, the rich will keep gaining strength, and the citizens can maybe try to keep gaining strength. And so that's like what happens. Like if any of these forces stays behind, like you veer to one side or the other, right? It's like if like some people like gain too much strength, like let's say like the wealthy gain too much strength, and they take control of the Leviathan, then they don't respect the rights of the people, then it can get despotic. For example, right? If a small group of people, if like many people are getting like powerful, but like they're fighting in between, or like social trust disappears, then it goes towards like the absent Leviathan, right? And so it's this idea that for like the narrow to like walk the narrow corridor, everyone in society has to all be like running in conjunction, right? So like the state is going to try to grow because that's what it tries to do. You know, if you're the state, usually that's what it tries to do is like maintain its own power and like justify its own existence. Then the rich are going to try to get richer, and like the people are going to have to try to like make sure they still hold the shackles of the Leviathan, and then the Leviathan can then like make sure that the more powerful aren't abusive towards the less powerful, right? And it's this idea that everything has to go like simultaneously or it collapses. And that's why it's so difficult to do, because it requires like constant activity from basically every member of society, right? And what you realize in democracy is like it's not enough to just have a democracy that like some people that aren't kings and change every 4 years or every 10 years or every 20 years like vote for laws. Like you need to have society deeply involved in the political participation, right?
And in a good direction.
And in a good direction, right? Obviously, because like I think when society becomes empowered, but they don't go in a good direction, it tends to go towards the absent Leviathan, right? Because it's like they just destroy the current system, and if there's too much infighting, then no one will ever agree on like a new system unless someone comes in and is despotic, right? I guess it can lead to the despotism, but it's only because there is like so much anarchy that someone's like, hey, we need to put an order, right? And he like in the book they compare like they would say that a state that's a little bit like absent Leviathan is like the Lebanese state, because it's like they almost like there's like this idea that like they like have they don't even want to do a census because they don't want to know like which like minority or whatever, like not minority, but it's obviously not minority, right? It's like which ethnicity is like more represented actually in the country, because there's like this fine balance between what has been like tensious relationships in the past between Christians, Muslims. I think it's Shia Muslims. I don't know if Shia. I think it's Shia, but I know very little about different Muslims, especially in a country like Lebanon. But what they're saying in this book is that like they like the state was like completely like useless and didn't pass laws, and like basically has been doing continuous resolutions for the last 40 years and doing fucking nothing. And it's like, and then the economy is not growing because the state's not powerful enough to like enforce security perfectly. But also they fear the slippery slope into despotism, right? That would be like actually giving the state too much power, or like one ethnicity of power over the others, right? And so they're not in complete state of Hobbes' war, but it's a bit anarchical.
I mean, I think if like an even more extreme case would be like Afghanistan, which has is because of the problem with like a lot of Afghanistan's problems nowadays, and for the last 40 something years, has been because like the world has collectively tried to impose their version of governance and state into Afghanistan, and it's failing because for such a kind of like rural tribalistic society, none of the people have like a common identity, in the sense like if you go to Spain, sure, there's people in Castile, Galicia, then of course there's a case of País Basco or Catalonia. They have more separate identities, but most people would say, if you pick at random, you say, what are you? They'll say Spanish. If Spain looked like Afghanistan, every single like comunidad autónoma would be saying there's something else, and they can't agree. Like they have no the idea.
There's
of, like,
no shared identity.
There's no shared nationality, which that was like the common trend of the 17th and 18th century, especially more so in the 19th. Disparate groups of people uniting under one shared identity, which made it easier to conduct themselves. Go to Afghanistan, the Soviets tried to impose a state. The state operated only really in Kabul. They couldn't really impose their will upon like the outskirts. especially because Afghanistan is such a mountainous country, it becomes impossible, like physically, to actually like go places quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Then the Americans came, war on terror. They tried again to impose a state. They couldn't do it because the states. Many times when you hear about the state or like a power source, like a state-like entity in fiction, they'll say an octopus because it has many tentacles that can spread out.
Okay.
Afghanistan. This is the absent Leviathan. The Leviathan of the octopus can't extend its tendrils far enough into different areas. Hence, it's weak and it's in a complete state of anarchy now. Now we have to see now with the Taliban government. I don't want to say we wish them the best, but they certainly have a lot on their plate right now.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, I wanted to like compare like, because what you're saying is about like disparate groups of people that don't have a shared identity, and obviously Afghanistan is like, it's not a small location, but when you compare it to like other like the rest of Europe, for example, Europe was in a state of like, especially like 100 years ago in the wars, like a state where like people didn't like identify at all with each other, and they were enemies, mortal enemies, and killing each other. And nowadays there's like a European identity that has surged, right?
Well,
there's people on Twitter with like European flags in their bio. You know what I mean? That would be crazy like 100 years ago, right? So I know that most people don't think of themselves European first, but it is an identity that's beginning to grow, right? Like maybe it's on a downwards trajectory like the last 5 to 10 years, but it's an identity that's much more in existence than it was 50 years ago. And so this collective identity that's growing, it allows for people to be more integrated, right? And whether or not we can achieve that, like what I was like trying to think about this is like, can we achieve that like within humanity, like the collective humanity identity? And I think it's like, if you look at humanity right now, sure, like states themselves are decently controlled, but like the countries themselves are in a state of war, right? Of Hobbes' war. Like there is no real valid international law. There is no real existent international Leviathan, right? There is no country, like there's no institution in the world that when the Israelis commit a genocide is like, hold up, we're intervening, right? Like what exists is basically a bunch of different Leviathans, right? All competing, and you almost need the Leviathan of Leviathans, right? You need a shackled Leviathan, a giant shackled Leviathan shackled itself by other Leviathans that themselves are shackled by the people, right? Which is a very complicated, state of affairs, but I wouldn't say it's an impossible state of affairs. It's just a complicated one. But what is true is that like
this episode started as an analysis of like
this is like
international
globalism rant part 2 electric boogaloo.
No, this is more like a kaiju battle, like sending the Leviathan,
Let them fight. No, but it's like, but this is what I'm saying is like there is no international law. Like the U.S. is like against the wishes of many people, like doing like, how do you say?
Well, they didn't ratify the Rome Convention, hence they're not beholden to the International Criminal Court.
Well, yeah, exactly. They're not in the International Criminal Court. I mean, I feel like at the end of the day, the court is still like mostly useless because you need to have like an actual like executive arm of it.
That's true, but this is the thing.
It's more about it's still aspirational. It's better than nothing, I would say, because it's like. It's better than nothing because it's an aspiration of maybe one day will be better. Because I feel that nothing is just the pure state of war, right?
But the thing is, this has happened before. The predecessor of the United Nations was the League of Nations, surging after the First World War, because they agreed back then First World War was so like devastatingly bad that they thought we should have a mechanism to try and prevent this, right? Like mediate conflicts internationally. A lot of countries, they thought it was a good idea. The US president at the time, Woodrow Wilson, thought this was a good idea. It was basically kind of like his child. But US Congress didn't ratify participation to the League of Nations. Hence, one of the world's most powerful countries isn't taking part in the League of Nations. It was doomed from the start. Yeah. Because they didn't have their Leviathan.
I would say the same of the United Nations, because the United Nations Security Council having vetoes ridiculous. There's all this means is that I understand it from the point of view of the U.S. And it's like, hey, like actually, like the rest of the world's really. I don't want them to like get together and make choices against me, right? Fair enough. It's like I guess, but it's like at the same time, it's like you should still like make your military what it is. Like the U.S. If the U.S. went to war with the rest of the world, it's not a sure fight that the rest of the world wins. You know what I mean?
No.
It's likely, but it's not a sure fight, and it would be fucking devastating. So like, did the U.S. even need the veto? Is the real question, right? And it's like obviously countries like China, France, England, and Russia were happy to have the veto, right? Because they weren't as powerful as America, and they were like, but maybe they wouldn't have ratified the UN if not for the veto, right? Because they were powerful enough to cause problems.
Yeah.
They weren't powerful enough to like destroy the entire world or conquer it or at all, but they were powerful enough to cause problems, right? And so you need a genuine. I think that in the end of the, I don't know what the timeline is, but I'm certain that eventually humanity will have some kind of world government. Now, it better not like a despotic one would be horrible, but we like. What this book shows is that like the most growth, prosperity, and like the best life is in the narrow corridor where you have like, you know, like a state that's strong, but people that are like able to overthrow it if it goes like too much in this despotic direction, right? It's a challenge. It's a gigantic challenge that I don't know if we're ever gonna see in our lifetimes, and it's even then not only like. Creating the world government is also not the end of it because the Red Queen effect is still in condition. You still have to have people like checks and balances. That was the genius of like the American system of checks and balances, right? But the problem is, as we've seen this year, the checks and balances are only as good as the people that are in the institutions, right? Yeah. If Congress doesn't want to check the president is not gonna be checked, right? It's that simple. And obviously, like. A despotic Leviathan in the world scale would be fucking horrible, which is why maybe the state of war for now is a little bit more desirable. I don't know, but
I can't believe Godzilla, King of Monsters, is now a cautionary tale about international.
Yeah, of course. Listen, in the particular, there's a universal, and the universal, there's a particular. But I think it's a really interesting conversation, and I'm not gonna say like, hey, let's. I don't think we're in a point today where that would be either viable or good to have like every country like genuinely have like a perfect like power in the UN and say like, you know, like if China managed to convince half the world's population, well, half the world's the representatives, the representatives of half the world's population to like attack another country, that would be horrible, right? And so there needs to be like a trust but verify system of like, hey, you can be in an institution as long as you respect these human rights and do these things and like some sort of laws to be in the institution in the first place. But it's a very difficult problem. Like I don't want to minimize it and say like, oh, it's, you know how it says like Warren Buffett has this quote for like investing. It's like investing is simple, but it's not easy, right? Like his whole argument is that like, if you put money like, I mean, and it's been true largely like throughout like the history of the U.S. If you put money like in the stock market, eventually that money will like, given enough time, it's almost assuredly gonna be higher than when you put it in. Like if you gave it infinite time. Obviously, like if the time period is small, then it might not be the case. But if the time period is sufficiently large, then it's almost a certainty that your investment will like multiply several times over, right? And I think similar in the case of like, you know, like the world government. Like the idea is simple, of like, oh, let's all get together and sing Kumbaya. It's simple, right? I can describe it that easily, but it's in implementation is not really easy because there's a lot of ugliness and hesitation and distrust that exists within humanity for good reasons because we've been killing each other for our history. So.
It's beyond just a sense of like because of killing, like even when it came to, shall we say, more positive aspects of the human existence, Like the UN's history of trying to impose, like the UN Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. That was such like the problem to like implement, because it turns out even things like what is a right across the world mean many different things, and there's a lot of resistance by countries to have a Western style liberal democracy version of human rights, such as, for example, like freedom of religion is a good idea until they try to make it so that the state
enforce,
well, like separation of church and state. Then suddenly a lot of people have a problem with that. You can be allowed to think whatever you want, but then trying to enforce that version of Western like democratic ideals onto like the world government level, bad idea. Then because of the Cold War, there's many things in the Cold War.
Yeah, you
social and economic rights was a heavy sticking point. The Americans didn't like it. Obviously, the Soviet Union wanted it. We only got the social and like economic and cultural rights later. Was like the second wave of international human rights law, and even then, those rights are seen by many pejoratively as like valueless. Because it's one thing to say, oh, you know, like the right to freedom of torture. Everybody can agree with that, more or less, unless you're at this point tyrannical dictator.
Yeah, exactly.
But the idea,
unless you're the U.S. and they voted against it, no, like in a resolution, like recently in the UN.
But things like
I don't know too much about the wording of whatever the resolution was, but the headline looks bad.
Yeah, it doesn't look good.
Headline looks bad.
But one thing is like a right, what's called a negative right, which means the right to not have something done upon you, like freedom from torture,
freedom to not be killed. Yeah,
freedom, like abolishing the death penalty. Those are easy rights. Everybody can agree to those and enforce. Well, I say in theory, like everybody can say
they're easier to accept.
If I tell you you're now no longer allowed to kill somebody, that's easy to do for you. What do you have to do? Nothing.
You have to do nothing. Yeah.
If you now have a universal right that says everybody has a right to housing, oof.
Yeah, you have to. You have to give people houses.
Something has to be paid up.
Yeah.
So that right, and I think
no such thing as a free lunch.
Yeah, bringing this back to the discussion, to implement like a unified world, in the sense like I don't know whether it be the UN or just the whole world under one banner. The only way I see it happening is if we go back and look throughout how the UN was established, is going to be another cataclysmic.
I mean, I fear that, and I mean, that's also my theory of what's going to happen in the world. And I fear it because I think that if there is another war, then the deaths are going to be in the hundreds of millions. And if there's another really serious world war, I fear it.
Those are rookie numbers.
I think that I'm almost sure that we're going to get there. The question is, how are we gonna get there? Because it's like, the thing is like, one idea that I've really like explored recently is that I think that we're not necessarily that much smarter or better than our predecessors in humanity, even like 3,000 years ago. Like we know more, but we're not necessarily more intelligent, right? Like IQ's gotten better, but it hasn't gotten better by like
orders of magnitude.
Like we have like what, like 1 billion times more knowledge than the Greeks did, or even more, and we're probably like at best twice as smart. Like honestly, like at best we're probably like twice as smart as them, like IQ wise. And what this shows to me is like I don't really think that good things in governance happens because we got better. It's like this is classical evolution. Like things change, technology advances, technology exacerbates inequalities of power because like the floor is still the floor. You can still be destitute and have nothing and be dying of hunger, right? That floor is the same 100,000 years ago as it is now.
Yeah.
But the ceiling keeps rising, right? How rich a person can be, how much power they can wield, how much how many people someone can kill with like a button. Is getting higher and higher every year, right? So inequality is rising, power differentials is rising, and the only things that really survive that well are liberal democracies that actually like ensure equality, or like not equality but not too much inequality, right? And I don't think that the democracy is increasing is not a function of like us being better people. I think it's a function of democracies being a better system and surviving because they're a better system. Because it's just survival of the fittest, right? Democracies have become more needed as like inequalities of power have risen, and so they've appeared more, right? And that's the general idea that I have, and why I think that like you're gonna have to it's gonna be like a really difficult thing that we're gonna have to fix, and there are the bill's gonna come due, like protectionism is on the rise, nationalism is on the rise in many places. Economic extremism is on the rise in many places. Some people's like, hey, we have to be complete socialists, or hey, we have to be complete libertarians. And it's like, no, dude, like completely libertarian countries are fucked. Completely socialist countries are fucked. Like, you don't want to live in North Korea. North Koreans don't want to live in North Korea. North Koreans kill North Koreans.
Oh, you mean totalitarian?
Totalitarian. I mean, there's no communist has to be totalitarianist, because you're never gonna have everyone agree with everything. And it's basically like...
Well, but I meant more like in the theme of like the book, because it's more like completely absent.
Well, yeah, exactly. I'm just like doing it like it's more despotic Leviathan. Right? And so we are entering a state of like the US is losing its prominence as like, the Pax Americana is disappearing. If anything, you could say that the US was a kind of how despotic, how shackled it was is up to interpretation, right? And this is an argument I had with Farhan in the last episode, and it's like, obviously, like some people in the U.S. had much more control over the Leviathan that is the U.S., but it was somewhat controlled. It is still somewhat controlled by its democracy, right? So they couldn't do insane genocides, right? They could never have done like concentration camps they could do internment camps for the Japanese. No. And that was still viewed, but it's viewed badly, right? And it and people like, hey, like maybe at the time is like, hey, like, but very recently afterwards, like very quickly afterwards, they were like, hey, this was shit, And so like the US has been a sort of like half despotic, half shackled Leviathan, maybe even half absent, right? Because they don't have even full control of the country. But it was the Leviathan keeping control over other nations, and that's disappearing. The new Leviathans are rising, at least in the case of China. But also there's like states that are like powerful but not too powerful, like I don't know, like the Egyptians have like a good military, and they're like threatening war with like all their neighbors, right? But like the UAE funding the Sudanese civil war, like the RSF, that's a case of like a new appearing Leviathan, right? That's like, I want the resources in Sudan because I need gold. I never had gold. Funding basically a genocide, or at least a civil war. I don't know, but I mean the violence has been so horrific. Like whether or not one side is worse than the other, I have no clue. I have no idea about Sudanese history. But if you can see the blood from space, that shit is not good.
I think on the other flip side, on the flip side of these last 14 to 20 years, there's been a shining example of where the absent Leviathan has really reared its head, or metaphorically speaking, not reared its head. The entire Sahel belt in Africa.
What's the Sahel belt?
It's like the Sahel is a region of Africa, kind of. It's where Mali and the neighboring countries are. Is where in essence the Saharan,
right below the sub-Saharan Africa, but just below.
Yeah, it's just below the. I think it's bordering on the Saharan desert.
So everything from Mali, Chad, Niger, Sudan, Chad.
The last 15 years, I think, would be accurate to say. Broadly, these regions have collapsed into a complete state of anarchy, and the rise of so many factions of terrorist groups, especially the Islamic State.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's horrifying to see, but it's a glaring example of what can go wrong if there isn't something to actually just stamp down its foot.
And it's especially horrible because war was always bad, even when our best weapons were swords. Now it's terrifying. Now these guys have bombs and AKs and bazookas, You know, they can explode buildings with the touch of a button.
It's not,
and it's like...
And soon we might not just have bombs, we might have sentient bombs.
We might have sentient bombs.
Like drone bombs or like...
ChatGPT, walk into Congress and explode.
In the last 2 years...
You're going to have suicide bombers that are robots.
No, it's not we will have
the
already.
jihad.
We already have. Like, they're in, at least in Ukraine, in the conflict.
Well, yeah, like the drones.
They've been not just testing, they've been using suicide drones. Like, thankfully they're apolitical suicide drones. The last thing we need is them shouting like propaganda, but...
Last thing we need to give them the internet and Twitter. But yeah, like, I think we're entering a period of more absent Leviathan than we've been in the end of the 20th century. Obviously, the start of the 20th century, I would say, was very much absent Leviathan. Again, like, in the sense that there's, like, a lot of world powers were comparative, right? In power, right? Like, the US, like, in 1920s, the US, Germany, France, like, England, there were differences in their power, but they were comparable. Right? None of them were like the Soviet Union even.
Yeah, sorry for cutting you off. I just realized what you said. Like, the light bulb exploded inside my brain. It was too powerful. It has been the rise of the absent Leviathan. But I was just thinking in terms of international relations, which is not really the remit of like the book and the theory. It's more like within a country. If anything, the rise of the absent Leviathan, like, position or state in societies has been much more widespread. That's because, like, the EU has been trying to tackle one of the most difficult and, like, hard to solve problems, that is international, like, companies, like these supranational, like Facebook, Google. Well, sorry, not Facebook anymore. Meta, Google.
How dare you dead name a company?
Twitter/X, the social media site formerly known as Twitter. These are entities or groups or conglomerates which are so powerful that they just defy the traditional understanding of, like, the state. Because the state, like, in the past, the state could just say...
Well, you, like, obviously they don't have armies yet, but, like, a period of history that I'm really interested in is, like, the East India Company, right? Like, they had armies, but they were also, like, this, not stateless, they were related to the English, but they had a lot of power just on their own.
Yeah.
But, like, sorry, complete your point, because I just want to...
Well, that's the thing, like, the East India Company is maybe an older example of this. A part of society that is so powerful they can actually rival the state. Because the East India Company was more a classical example of this. They had military force, so they could defy the monopoly of legitimate violence, which is what makes a state. Nowadays, it's, say for example, like, Meta does something horrendously bad. What do you do? Like, how do you punish them?
Yeah, you really can't, because there's no international law. Like, it has to be the US.
They lie within the scope.
Like, the only people that can really do something... I mean, like, even then, like, they could theoretically move to another country, right? But, like, that's what I think. Like, I think in general, there's, like, a race to the bottom with this. For, like, all countries lowering taxes. Like, sure, like, Ireland, you're getting rich because, like, you become a tax haven for corporations, but you're just making life worse for everyone. But, and it's like, maybe it's your turn to be on the limelight. Fair enough. Like, you know, the French invaded everyone. The English colonized you. You know, it's like, what you're doing is not the most moral, like, immoral act in history. But it's, you know, it's leading to, like, this sort of situation. Whereas we did in, like, the Why Nations Succeed video or Why Nations Fail video, which is, like, all the, like, 9 out of 10, or, like, maybe, like, 8 out of 10 of, like, the strongest countries, like, GDP per capita are all tax havens. All tax havens. That's crazy. That's insane. Like, not even oil states, right? Or they'll show Qatar is, like, 12. And it's this case that, like, we are in a state of war where, like, the say, like, the merchant class or whatever, like, the companies can take advantage of, like, the lack of cooperation between states, right? And you're right, like, I think, like, a company like Amazon or Meta, like, they have more revenue and income than, like, a lot of countries. Like, genuinely. They are more, like, you know, like, as long as we respect the US dollar, for now, it's still gonna be respected for a while, I think. But as long as we respect it, these countries have more economic power. I mean, these companies have more economic power than a lot of countries. And that's crazy. And in general, I'm not against there being corporations that operate everywhere. But like the whole idea of like, one thing I say a lot on this channel is like, hey, like liberty is the lack of domination, right? There can be no institution, no entity powerful enough to dominate the rest, or dominate, or like because obviously like monopoly is the worst, but oligopoly is still pretty bad, right? And it's like there's no monopoly in violence and there's no monopoly on like tech, but there's oligopolies in tech, right? And so in that sense, like it's already pretty bad, and we'll see what it leads to. I think that eventually, honestly, I do fear that war is the most likely outcome, just because historically has been. But I don't think it's the only outcome, because I think that the solutions are verifiable and we can obtain them, but often people don't look for the solutions until the problem is like super bad enough, right? It's like taking a vaccine, right? I understand the hesitancy to take a vaccine. You're putting something to your body, but you have very little idea what the fuck it does, right? I mean, I would argue the same for like half the food you eat, but whatever, right? You're putting something in your body that you don't know what it contains. And obviously that's scary, no? But in 99% of cases, it's the right choice to take a vaccine, right? And it's like all this like quote in the history is that like an ounce of the vaccine is worth a pound of the cure, right? But we rarely, I mean, people are just vaccine skeptic, like, right? I have
to pause you here for a second because I'm kind of stupid and hard of hearing at times. I thought you meant LSD instead of vaccine. And I was genuinely curious where this analogy was going. I was super into it.
Did I say something wrong? Did I speak incorrectly? Did I say LSD?
No, it's
Freudian slip?
Years ago, I ruptured both my eardrums. So I find it hard to hear sometimes. But now that you said vaccine, now that I understood vaccines, I'm totally not interested in this conversation.
No, man, you're just interested in LSD.
At least it's like, okay, this sounds interesting. But yeah, it's true.
The vaccine is worth an ounce of the vaccine is worth a pound of the cure.
Yeah.
But I mean, people just don't. People are vaccine skeptic. People obviously we know that like the liberalization and like unity of the world post-war and the Pax Americana, like the Leviathan created like more prosperity for the entire world. We know that, and yet we fail to like extend that into more world cooperation, right? We fail to build more bridges with each other, even though we know through history that it's better, because we don't know enough, right? Like we know, but we don't know enough. But there might be scary times in the future, but if you look, it's like a little bit echoing MLK and all that, although he was saying it more with justice than with prosperity. Like we are so much more, like when you take the averages, like and look through like and do long periods of time, we are so much better off than people were even 200 years, even 100 years ago. Like even then, like if you told me would I want to be born in the 80s, like in the 80s, I'd probably say like maybe, yeah, like that would be nicer. But in the 50s, oh shit, no internet, like not seeing the internet till I'm 60, it's like, or like till I'm 50, it's like that would be like even, like, so like the world in general does get better with time, but it might be the case that some lessons are going to be learned the hard way, as tends to be the case with humanity. We usually don't.
Well, and as the book points out, like when I was studying undergrad, like history and then political science, one of my teachers said people assume that like democratization and like increased standards of living as a whole is something that can only go up within time. I said, no, that's a very simplistic and dangerous way to see it, because the Red Queen effect, you have to keep running along.
Again, what gives me hope is that in the long run, whatever, like it's been a very messy process, very messy, but in the long run, it's been true, right? In the long enough run. In the short run, we did a Holocaust. I mean, I say as humanity, not me and my people, but humanity did a Holocaust.
Venezuela was the true architect.
Yeah, of course, and me specifically. Kidding.
You're a time traveler.
Very much kidding. But like we have to realize that these horrible like counter reactions to other problems, like Germany, like pre Third Reich, was like a democratic socialist country, right? They were, but like
No. Well,
the Weimar Republic was like democratic socialist, not super, but like more than like
liberal, really.
I'll say like liberal, but like with some government perspective, like welfare, like not much, obviously,
okay.
like the amount, but like even then, like government welfare was like an incredibly new like concept. I mean, obviously, like some government services have been for like 4,000 years, right? Government services have been a thing for 4,000 years, but like
good government services.
yeah, exactly. That's another question altogether. But like their reactions to liberalism was fascism or communism, right? Like the hyper liberalism of the 19th century, with the robber barons and everyone getting really, really rich from like the introduction of capitalism from mercantilism, right? The reaction to that was the rise of socialism, communism, and fascism. Those are the two things that were on the rise back after like the libertarian boom, like the liberal boom of like the 19th century. And we are seeing socialism and communism and fascism rise in all our countries, basically, right? Like look at parties like the AFD or parties like Reform or Vox. Like, are they Nazis? No, they're not Nazis, right? I mean, maybe AFD, some of them are. I'm certain some AFD people are Nazis, especially Alice for Deutschland. But obviously, they're not as bad as what the Nazi Party was. But things can get worse, and they can become that. Obviously, is Zoran someone who I think is gonna be the next Stalin? No. I don't think Zoran's gonna be the next Stalin, but it's an indication of where things are heading, right?
All I'm saying is, Stalin had a mustache. Zoran has a mustache. The
He has a
size of
beard.
their people.
Yeah, he has a beard. Like if you shave, the mustache is the problem. Truly, Hitler, Stalin, mustache. Clear as day problem. but yeah, that's the point, and it's that like listen, like the excesses of liberalism, which is letting corporations and people get as rich as and individuals get as rich as they want, is the rise of fascism and communism. Thankfully, history has taught us this, and thankfully it was recently enough that we know it, not for certain, but like we can spot a pattern. And if we're smart enough and like look at this history and at the data enough, we're gonna realize that this is exactly what's happening. Even Peter Thiel, like, did you see like the letter he sent to like Mark Zuckerberg in 2020? It's like, yes, I know all these millennials are going towards socialism, and like that's bad, but like obviously like if they're getting indebted and they don't get a house till they're 40, then they're not gonna accumulate capital as fast as we did, and so they're not gonna be as happy with capitalism because they're not gonna be as rich as us. And it's like, well, yeah, Peter, you're correct. What the fuck are you doing about it, man? It's like you are right. People are getting angrier and angrier, but it's like let's try to get to the actual solution.
You know that meme of like you hate to see it when the person you despise the most
okay. Horrible person you hate the most made a great point, but it's like, man.
I was thinking maybe it was like concluding remarks.
Yeah, we're definitely concluding now.
I do like to inject levity. I say look into the world of fiction for ideas. They constantly refer to the different types of Leviathan, and we're talking about before. We think at some point like a unified world. I don't know if government, but like a unified world under one banner.
Yeah, like a serious UN.
Yeah.
a serious UN with actual teeth.
But like maybe I'm reading too much into the literal Leviathan part. Ozymandias, spoilers if you ever want to watch Watchmen, this is a big one. Ozymandias in Watchmen, to prevent total nuclear Armageddon between the USSR and the United States, creates a fictional, or at least makes believe that a fictional, like a gigantic monster from outer space has come and wiped out New York and Moscow and
So he does
everything. We need to create.
He doesn't create one monster, but he creates like a species of interdimensional squids, gigantic squids, that crush every major city in the world, basically.
So again,
and he does this to like, this is the whole theory of like a unified enemy. And he basically unified humanity against interdimensional space squids. And the Watchmen series is, I quite like that series. It's like the movie changes the plot into being like Ozymandias copying Dr. Manhattan's powers and making it hate Dr. Manhattan instead of making it hate like international space squids.
Because that's in the comics.
But
the same idea though.
Like, I feel like
a monster.
The idea is similar enough, that you create like this monster that you like that you defy, and then people start working together because it's like, hey, there's bigger fish to fry, right?
So
I mean, it's like, and it's true. Like, unfortunately, I think the history of humanity is that like we do need a bigger problem to make us forget our smaller problems, right? It's like, oh, my neighbor's gay. That guy is aiming an AK at me. Like, I think there's bigger issues. It's like, sure, like I have, like, not me, but like other people might have a problem with that. But it's like the small problems disappear in the face of big problems. Right?
I think we're on the verge. If some people play their cards right, I think we have a solution to quite a few of our walls right now. I'm joining the J-Rag. I
feel like that's the best faction.
I feel we need to. I feel
like the J-Reg faction might be just like the absent Leviathan.
I mean, we need to like somehow cause people to genuinely fear AI.
AI be the unifying.
This might be the one thing like a lot of people might actually band together over. Because, for example, like correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like in many spiritual circles, AI or like robots are not actually cannot be seen as
because it's like human it's human exceptionalism.
So
it's human centrism, and it's like makes sense that humans will be human centric.
So hear out my megalomaniac plan for world peace. The spiritualists, we can grab them because they fear the robot. Then us common folk, we won't have jobs. Easy enough.
Makes sense.
Then we can go for like the namby-pamby crowd and say, AI doesn't respect human rights. They don't care. I think we have a plan here.
It could. It may work in the future, honestly. But I think in general, human nature, maybe even beyond human nature, is that this is going to be the case. And we're always going to have some conflict. Maybe in 300 years there'll be aliens. We're always going to have some conflict, but in the long run, things get better, right? That's what history has taught us. That in the long run, things get better. But, let's try to avoid those pitfalls that we know how to avoid. And, I would say we all know, but like, some people know and some people don't know. But, that's what it means to like educate yourself. And humanity is always... the literacy rates are so much higher than they used to be, right? Like insanely higher. And that's like something that to be super proud of as a human, right? 300 years ago, almost no one spoke. 90% of the world population was illiterate. And nowadays it's like the opposite. Nowadays like 90% is illiterate, right? That's a crazy benefit of the world. And it means that we are learning, we are getting better. But yeah, let's try to avoid the ugliness and I make this metaphor. There's like two ways to learn that a stove is hot. You can, learn from someone who learned that 1,000 years ago and then told someone and then told someone else and then told someone else. And then you're like, yeah, it makes sense. I'm not going to touch the stove. Or you can touch the stove. Touching the stove is a good lesson. You'll probably never do it again. But you can also learn from the guy who told you not to do it. Right?
I disagree with this metaphor because one experiment concluded that people, if they're sufficiently bored, like if there's absent any other stimulus in the room, will deliberately press a button that will electrocute them, despite the fact they've been told so. Because they simply, like the human mind is so, like devious. Like what's the phrase? Idle hands are the devil's plaything.
Yeah, that's a phrase. Yeah.
So like, it turns out humans will literally just press a button to electrocute.
Curiosity is, yeah.
It's not even curiosity because like they know,
Fair enough. You want to feel something.
Yeah.
It's like.
So yeah, I think people will be pressing.
Oh, there's a song I used to listen when I was like 9, when it's like gonna show the level of my depression at that age. That is called by 3 Days Grace. It's called Pain, and like the chorus is like, I'd rather feel pain than nothing at all. And I think that it's something about humanity. But yeah, I think let's wrap it up by saying like, I will finish this book. If there's anything else to add on the next podcast, I'll add it. But the next book for like in a month from when this video is releasing is gonna be Breakneck, which is gonna be a discussion between like the difference of like the Chinese philosophy and why like the author thinks it's more like engineer based, and the American philosophy and why like the author believes that it's more like lawyer based. And we're gonna say like how these like two societies are differ, like where value or like rights are maintained, and that's gonna be the book for the next one. I'll put like a picture of it here. And thanks for joining us. See you in the next one. Peace.